Okay, there we go. All right, we are live. We are live. Another beautiful day, another beautiful morning. If you're watching the replay, happy good morning, good evening, good night. I don't know what time you're watching this, but we are here with Dr. Barnes today. As always, we have myself and Fancy and Sylvia. And today's episode is talking about healing the healers. Dr. Barnes, she has a passion for oh, you know what? I'm just gonna let you say it before I say what I gotta say on the back end.
Definitely. And first of all, it's so great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Um, yes, I am Dr. Teresa Barnes. I'm a holistic psychotherapist, certified integrated mental health provider, best-selling author, and international speaker. And I have developed a platform for mothers who are also professional caregivers. Often these women are caregiving throughout the day. These could be your teachers, other therapists, doctors, nurses, ministry leaders. And then they come home, they often have the custodial care of their children. So, this, I believe, this population is a forgotten population. I don't think many people think about that mothers who heal and professionally and also personally need to be held while they do the holding. So my whole mission is to reclaim our humanity because I am too a mother who is a therapist, and I think a lot of people forget that we are not machines and we need also to have someone hold our pain as well. So that's what I do. I like to spread this mission through providing psychotherapy to other treatment providers, doing speaking engagements, of course, writing. So, yes, as always, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm super excited about for this episode is, especially when you're talking about the mothers. I was on a phone call with my mom the other day, and she was like, "I watched the show," and I was like, "I didn't even know that." So I hope that she's tuning in today so she can get the help, because I know it was not an easy task raising me or my brothers. So whatever knowledge and wisdom that you can have to share with her and to share to all the mothers out there, I truly and greatly appreciate it. But as with my other co-host, I am not a mother, so I just want to sit back and listen to this conversation with the three mothers here, and I'll just ask questions because I'm taking this as a learning experience for myself.
I'll say that I feel it's profound, Dr. Barnes. Sometimes more often than not, we're unseen. And I find myself currently in a situation, I like to call it a sandwich, where, yes, I'm a mother to a 21-year-old son, right? But I also have parents, right, in their 70s. I have a grandmother in her 90s, right? So the caregiving doesn't just stop with our children, right? You find yourself in a position compartmentally. They need you to the left, they need you to the right, and here you are in the middle, right? And it's a balancing act because you're never going to forsake your children, you're not going to forsake your other loved ones, right? But it's
Yes.
where do you find your love and care so you're not depleted and you can still give. And people do not take that into account. A lot of positions, right, even like with what we do, right, it spills over. People are going to talk about, when they're talking about their finances, how they got to that point, how they're going to get out of that point, right? And a lot of times people can become stagnant from a monetary standpoint because they are being the caregiver to so many people, right? So it doesn't leave room for those other things. So I just think it's so profound for you to shine a light and say, hey, you need your care too, right? That's not
Absolutely.
something that's common.
Absolutely. In my conversation with Tino a couple weeks ago, he was shedding light on the kind of this financial planning, that kind of holding these very intimate self experiences people have. People have a relationship with their food and their money, and they tend to be defensive about both,
Oh,
right? So I think when you're holding all the anxieties that finance, and some people suffer from money trauma too. I mean, they grew up in poverty or whatever. And so now you're telling them, well, this is what you need to do with your money. So I see everything really is relational, as you talked about, because you're being a mom who's also caring for aging parents and grandparents, holding all their anxieties about their money, just holding it and trying to help them make meaning, develop vocabulary for them, and then to go home. So he really Tino, you really did open up my eyes with that. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I was thinking like professional caregivers, like, you know, like I just mentioned, teachers and ministry leaders, and therapists. But he's like, oh no, any field where you're holding for people. And that really opened my eyes, because I was like, I didn't know financial planning was like that. You know, I'm not a financial planner. But then I had a friend who's an attorney, told me the same thing. She's like, well, attorneys do. So it's starting to kind of open my eyes about this kind of the intersectionality between mothering and how it infiltrates our professional realm, because we're holders. We're just holders. I got a God-given like badge of honor and sometimes a badge of pain, depending on what our kids are putting us through.
Yeah, I know when we were talking, Dr. Barnes, one of the things that you brought up that opened my eyes is when you were talking about holding, like, what do you do when you don't have the capacity to hold anymore? Like even Fancy was talking about, oh, I'm caring for these people and caring for those people. And it's just like, you're juggling all of this. Like, how do you drop something, but you know somebody else needs you there? How do you add on and increase that carrying capacity?
Oh, that is a very good question. This is, and like I said, I see everything relational. So I think like the social construct around mothering and what's a good mother, I think has started way before COVID. I just think COVID only just kind of reinforced this sense that, you know, we people in our lives tend to not even give us permission to ask for help. And I'll give you the perfect example. I remember we all going through something. So it was some hard place in my life. And I remember a family member said to me, but you help people. So that means that because I help people, then I shouldn't need help, you know? And I just thought, wow, it's probably just a snapshot of what I think society thinks in general. Especially if you're in a position where you are helping people professionally and personally, when you say, hey, I can't hold this all, I don't think they even give us permission. It's almost like we have to re-educate the people in our lives that, you know, we have needs as well, and we have to fight for them sometimes. I mean, so when you talk about not having a lot of spaces that pour into you, because we can only give what we have, right? And how can we do this without having the mommy guilt too, right? Or the caregiver guilt, like, okay, I'm going to take this moment to just not answer the phone or care for myself. I think it's a day by day process. I don't think I've achieved it fully, to be honest with you. But what I have decided to do is to ask myself, and this is my treatment approach as well. I ask myself, who needs the holding? Because it rarely is it the adult present day, Teresa. It's usually a child part that's coming alongside me for the ride. And our child parts have become extremely loud. And I have become more aware of my own in my own treatment. There's Teresa who's had needs, who maybe doesn't feel safe or feels threatened, comes up, right? Along with your children and your caregivers, she needs mothering as well. And I came to that realization. There is a treatment approach to that. It's called internal family systems. Dr. Frank Schwartz had come up with it. Richard Schwartz, I'm sorry, Dick Schwartz. He had come up with and then I think Dr. Frank Anderson kind of took it to another level. But I've kind of personalized this approach because I really look at it as how do I help women who are professional caregivers mother their own mind? Because we're mothering so many people outside of our mind and our bodies. But what if our mind needs to be mothered? Maybe our child parts within us need to be mothered. So when you are feeling overwhelmed, maybe asking, wait, who's here? Like, what do you need? You maybe not audibly, because you don't want people to think you're losing it, but like internally just say, okay, what do you need and what part needs to feel held? Because when I'm in my mother mode, I mean, maybe I need my husband to watch my kid while I go for a walk, or I need to get a massage or hang out with my sister or my friends or whatever. But when my child part needs to be held, I present much differently. And the people in our lives now, they don't know how to relate to our child parts because they don't know them. They meet us as adults, what we present to the world. So when those child parts come up, that's what makes this so hard relationally, because the people in our lives now don't know your 8-year-old. They don't. So you can't. So I had to realize that with my husband, I couldn't get mad at him because he couldn't be there for my 8-year-old. I used to get mad at him, like, well, he's not doing this or that, until I got to know her and mother her, and I'm like, oh, I can mother you in this. So as my husband's relating to his adult wife, and my child part is being triggered, then I need to go and say to her, what do you need? What can I do for you? So that's
Dr. Barnes, is there something where do people readily identify those different parts of them to even know, oh, this is from childhood because I didn't get such and such, because my caregiver, my parent didn't do so and so? Because you need to identify it first to even be able to say, hey, this is the part of me that's lacking. Was that hard for you to identify and convey to your husband?
It took him a few years, because it was like, I don't think people are used to talking in that language, right? Because when we talk about parts in the psychological world, it used to be pathologized, like, this multiple personality disorder, or
Exactly.
you got all these
Negative thing, right?
What's happening? Throw her in the new loony bin. But now I think what we're realizing is that, wait a minute, there are different experiences of ourselves that are not maybe fully resolved. So I don't think people are even comfortable or aware that they can talk in this language. Now, what we do here is, and we've all said it, like, you're just talking in casual, and you'd be like, man, part of me wants to do this. Another part, I just want to sleep, say, and go to bed. We talk about that. Like, well, part of me feels angry, but the other part feels sad. So we will talk in those terms. But I think in terms of whether we can personify that part and say, oh, what age was this part? Like, the part of me that wants to do that, what age does that feel like? Because I think once we could start personifying it by saying this is the age, okay, being that we're mothers, we know in some ways developmentally what that age needs, right? So if it's my 5-year-old self, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, going through mentally, like, okay, these are the concepts. What do 5-year-olds need? Sometimes they just want to be helped. They just want to play. They want to feel safe. And I think this whole parts work really really blew up after COVID, because what time has the issues around safety, security, stability is most prominent in our lives is childhood. And we were the most threatened during COVID. There was no stability. There was no security. There was no sense of grounding. The grounding gave way. So what happened? All our child parts came up, because that was the developmental stage where those things were so important. So I would tell people our child parts are still, they're out. I mean, they're out and they're running around, running into each other. And so the important thing is being able to make space for them and say, okay, you're out. Things that used to not bother me, I've noticed that I'm a lot more sensitive to certain things. And it's like, oh, well, she's here, she's out. So instead of trying to shame myself and say, oh, I shouldn't, I'm grown, I need to be I'd be like, okay, what do you need? And it took practice. It really did. And most of the times we're not used to kind of going internally, because we're so used to getting our gratification outside of ourselves. So when we're able to go internally and be able to say, what do you need? You're not going to really feel anything come up, because our child parts are used to being ignored. We try to get as much money, many degrees, and relationships to suppress and keep that part down when people don't see that, right?
Dr. Barnes, can I ask you, because you mentioned sensitivity, and I feel, as a former thug, I now have a heightened sensitivity, right? Everything affects me differently. It can be a Folgers commercial. It can be a tone in someone's voice, right? Things like that. Also, you spoke about space. And one thing I've learned through my sensitivity is sometimes, I often say, or I've been told, you have people who have people, and then you are the people who have people, right? You don't have nobody. You're that person, right?
That's right.
With that being said, in my sensitivity, what I've learned to do, I ask for permission, because as a collective, as women, I feel very comfortable going to Sylvia and telling her things. What I've learned to do is ask, do you have the space and capacity, right? I just want to dump, you know what I mean? I think that's important, right? For us to ask, because she's going through all of her, this one needs me, that one needs me, and I have my clients, right? So there's a cross there. So what would you suggest in terms of us getting familiar with being able to ask for that space, and also saying, hey, I'm full. You're like, I can't, because sometimes you need to say no so your cup don't overflow.
I actually love that to be able to ask, and did you have the capacity to hold? I just need things to be held. I don't
Yeah.
want you to fix it. I don't want you to tell me you shoulda, coulda, woulda. Bless
Yes.
God bless our family. I mean, they mean well, but they kind of go through that whole thing like, well, you need to done this, or they'll say, well, look at so and so, they had it much worse, and it's kind of funny. This is what I use, and I hope Dave Chappelle doesn't come after me and say, well, you're using my line, but it was funny, and then it's not raunchy, because I always have to tell people I'm in certain environments, it's not nothing bad, but he had said that he was talking to a friend. And he was talking to this friend, and he said, man, I'm really hungry. I'm just, let's go to lunch. I'm really hungry. And his friend's like, well, there are all kinds of people in the third world countries that are starving, in Africa and China, you're talking about you're hungry. And then he said, okay, but I still want lunch. And I just thought that, because I was thinking everybody has their hard.
That's it.
Can we just make space for each other's hard without just like, well,
judging it or comparing it, right?
It's dismissive. Yeah. It's telling us that you can't hold it, you won't hold it, and I think, again, I see everything relationally. And so when you say to them, can you hold this? It's almost like right away you're saying, you know what, I'm going to put my expectations on the side, because often we come to our relationships, especially people that we've known forever, we have expectations.
We do.
But it's kind of, sometimes there's this kind of trauma in our expectations, because they will fail us, and then they'll consistently fail us.
Yes.
And we hold that and we harbor that, but maybe they're just not wired to hold it. They're just not wired. So do we just say, well, then I'm going to be unforgiving and not forgive you? Or how can we seek those safe spaces?
Right.
Who can hold? Who in our lives are already doing some holding?
Right.
How can we spend more time with them? And that's what I try to do, is just say, okay, well, I know this person has the capacity, so I just got to connect with them more these days. And we're not always, everything's in seasons. There's some seasons where we're feeling more kind of like the adult self-leader that can kind of like make decisions. That's fine. You may not need all that, but when you do, being able to say, okay, who's there where I can be held? Other than constantly re-injuring ourselves, there's just some people just not built for it. So we grieve that, right? We just grieve.
Whoa. You said constantly re-injuring ourselves?
Yeah, if we go to the same people expecting something to be different. We've all done it, and it's like, I just have to recognize that these are the only people who really can hold it. So when I'm feeling vulnerable, I kind of hunker down, and I probably contact them. I have my spiritual life as well, and my faith. But the tricky thing about faith beliefs is that when you experience trauma because there's the little T's and then the big T's, they call it. The little traumas, where you're like, okay, this is kind of universal. I kind of feel like, someone's linking arms with me. The big T's, I see that in the periscope of aloneness. And when trauma is experienced and there's a sense that nobody understands, no one gets it, people relate to me as my pre-trauma self, and we all know what trauma does, irrevocably changes everything. So you're no longer the same person. Everybody in your relational world is relating to you like, oh, well, that, and you're just feeling just the wall. You're just feeling so disconnected from that. So don't know where I was going with it, but it was good.
Well, I know one of the things that we talked about before is talking about how do you recover from a shattered, assumptive world. That was huge. Can you just explain and maybe give an example of that? Yes. Something that you've seen or gone through. And I'm sure Sylvia and Fancy chime in if you have stories or things to relate to that as well.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, that was my segue, and it slipped my mind. So thank you, Tina. We're working. We got this energy going on. No, because when I was differentiating in my mind difference between a small T and a big T, I said it was this changed sense of self, that the way you relate to the world, the way you see your world has been completely changed because you are forever changed. And one thing and this is what what came out of my dissertation study, is that a shattered assumptive world is an essential feature of traumatic loss because it wasn't supposed to happen. Now, I would sit with these participants that I interviewed, people in my personal life, my own life experiences, and I said, okay, let's say I had a 90-year-old grandmother who died. Tragic loss, as if I'm close to her. But I can make meaning from, and people provide meaning for it. Oh, well, you know what? She's lived a long life. Look at the legacy she's left. Grandchildren, great grandchildren. She's owned these businesses. She's done. So you can look and you can just savor that and be like, yeah, you know, grandma's with me, blah, blah. But a child who dies? And majority of the participants I interviewed, they were the death of the young or either children or the unborn. And these were Christian psychotherapists, and they had to wrestle with that. Even though we know we live in a fallen world, but it's still in the heart of hearts and our souls, children are not supposed to die before their parents.
Do they tend to take it personal? Like, that feels personal. Why my baby? Why my child? Right?
Absolutely. And it's not supposed to happen, right? 90-year-old grandmother
we can reason with.
Yeah, but a 17-year-old, a 4-year-old, you're pregnant, and you know, and you're 6 months. I mean, it was really like tragic losses, and that's what the struggle was. You know, was that they were children, they haven't lived yet, they haven't lived their potential. So it just came to me as I was writing the results and the interpretation, and I finalized it, and I'm like, you know what? Essentially, this is what a traumatic loss is. Grieving is part of that, but I think the typical grieving responses, and they have the stages and all that, it tends to be a communal feel in some ways. I know the Westernized culture, I think we still challenge with where to put grief in general. I think those indigenous cultures get it. You know, it's very communal. We come alongside you. It's not this isolated experience on a Hallmark card, right?
Right.
We want to have people that can link arms and come alongside us in it. But with traumatic loss, it's the shattering. That this was not supposed to happen. And this doesn't have to be really the death of the young. It could be anything where you're like, I mean, a divorce to someone could be traumatic in this way, because they could say, you know, I come from a long line of family members. They've always stayed married for 30, 40, 50 years to death. And here I am, the only one in my family that's divorced. This was not supposed to happen. I mean, it really could be something like that, where you and I can be like, well, people get divorced every day. It's no big deal, which is another essential feature of trauma. Is it's subjective, because what may be traumatic to me may not be traumatic to you. That's why when I go back to that Dave Chappelle bit, we have to make space for everybody's heart, right? That's how we feel seen. You mentioned before, Fancy, feeling seen. And I think nowhere ever in our history have people felt more unseen than ever before. And we have all these social media outlets, all the look at my dinner, look at this, look at my outfit. But we essentially feel unseen. And I think that's what the trauma speaks to, is that piece. So I hope I answered the question. I go.
Yeah. So another thing that I remember you mentioning when you were talking about just how do you recover, is when you was talking about renegotiating safety. What does that look like? What does that feel like? You know, the assumptive world that you had just been shattered. So how do you put those pieces back together, especially with faith and everything? Because, you know, some people might be like, I'm angry at God and this wasn't supposed to happen. So how do I just renegotiate that safety?
We know that's what gets shattered, is the safety to trust in your own perceptions, your own thoughts, to trust your own mind. And when you don't feel safe in your own mind, that's a tricky thing. We can get away from threatening environments and people, but when we don't feel safe in our own heads, that's a whole different thing. And I think recovering from trauma is being able to feel safe in your head and in your body again. And so I think when we try to, and I only can speak, and even when I treat clients, it's like, how do we renegotiate safety? So even in the client situation, I said, what can I do to give them some sense of control? Because that's what we ultimately feel like. Everything is out of control. I can't control my thoughts. I can't control what my body does, all this other stuff. And so it could get right down to like, when do you want to meet? They'll be like, Tuesdays at 10. Okay. But then that has to be the sacred time, right? So I can't be, emailing them and say, can you switch this to Friday? It's Tuesday. I have to be very consistent, because I'm trying to contain the sacred holding to create a sense of safety. And so it really can be as basic as making sure our times are consistent when we meet. Um, Trying to see where they are, because this is not just another divorced person, but what does what being divorced say to them about them? That's where you start getting into that
Mhm.
internal dialogue, that tape recorder that says, because I'm divorced, that means I am dot dot dot. So getting them to engage in that internal dialogue, being able to trust what's in their head. And a lot of that is being able to say, oh wow, that's a great point, I'm glad you're doing, confirming from them that what you say has significance. It could be something as simple as that, as establishing safety in their own heads. Establishing safety in the relationships is a little different because you can't control the other person, right? So I can say, yeah, you can start feeling safe with your friends again. We don't know what their friends are going to say or what their spouse will say. But I think, again, we have to identify who is being triggered, not what, who. Because if it's a child part, they're not going to know how to hold her anyway. They're not going to know how to address her anyway. So, how can I then begin to mother these parts that feel so unsafe? I often walk clients through a type of visualization. They use this a lot in some of the trauma treatment, where we would put them, and of course, there's a lot of work gets to that, because I can't just say, okay, let's go back to your traumatic memory. I mean, you have to ground them, identify their safe space, make sure they can be attuned to place and time, and they can,
Mhm.
all that. But once we do that, then we go back into some of these memories, but we go back in a sense of, you're bringing you have that child part who was injured, and who else was that can we bring in? A person of strength in your past. Sometimes it is a deity, like it's God or image of God. And we bring all those players in that memory. And we almost play out, what would have you have done as your adult self for your child self in that situation? So I sometimes will go through that. I had a client, she's in her 40s, and we identified and we made safe her 4-year-old who was severely sexually abused. And she got her 4-year-old to be able to sleep and rest. So when we were in therapy, she's like, I don't need to go back there. She's sleeping. So then we got to her 10-year-old self, and then we got to the 15, and the 19 was she was a little rocky because she got into sex work then. And so we had to kind of do a lot with that. But um, she told me one time, and she said, hey, when are we to be done? She said, because I'm 45. So if we have to go through all these ages. And I had said, no, I said, it's the ages that matter. I said, we don't have to go through every single age, but there's the ages where some of these events had occurred. So sometimes the visualization helps, because you go in there and it's not like the child or the person's by themselves. Okay, I'm bringing in this adult part of me. I'm bringing in my deity or my grandma. A lot of people brought in these grandparents, right? I said, what was your grandma doing while you're doing that? So again, it's not a one size fits all, but with a handful of my clients, that has really worked for them to renegotiate, that they can feel safe in their head, because they have the capacity to bring these people of strength in. And they can feel safe with me, because see, as a therapist, my whole goal is to be able to hold it and
Mhm.
not run, not judge. And because we're not machines, when it re-triggers stuff for me, because there's
Mhm.
some things that trigger me.
Mhm.
And it's my responsibility as a therapist to go to my own therapy, because I can only take my clients as far as I've gone emotionally.
Mhm.
That's with therapists, hands down.
Mhm.
Every therapist, new therapists, people who are coming in the field as therapists, and even therapists who are not used to being held in their work, I said, you only taking this client as far as you're going. So if you're not doing your own emotional work, then you're not, in my ethical practice is getting your own therapy and getting consultation, because there are blind spots. Like there's some, I need some other therapist to say, hey, with that one client, I notice you tend to say this, you may want to think about that. It's a blind spot. So we're not all perfect. So yeah, I have very long, expansive answers for short questions. So you
That's
may
what we're here
reel
for.
me in.
Yeah, no, perfect. That's what we're here for. Am I hearing you say,
Mhm,
and I may be telling them myself, but I'm okay with that. I can be
mhm.
transparent. Am I hearing you say that in order to renegotiate the safety, we have to go back to that place? Or can I stay in my 50-year-old mind and say, you know what? That wasn't personal. That's normal. That's life. Life goes on. We're here now. We're going to keep going forward. We don't have to look back. Does that look different for everybody, or do you have to go back to that place to repair it?
Good question. I personally believe, and another therapist could sit here and say, no, let's deal with the here and now, because there are therapists that like, we are dealing with the here and now. Your thoughts, feelings, emotions, do something different. But I tend to kind of go back because I think the peeling of the layers that begins there. So I would say, well, yeah, I do believe, because rarely do I sit down with a client. It does happen. I'm not saying it doesn't, but rarely do I sit with clients and say, okay, this happened. And I sort of feel like this is an adult thing. Like, this is my adult self and all that. And I've had clients, they'll say that, and because they've done enough parts work, well, now they can identify. They're like, oh, I know my child part. This is not, this is not her. And that's what I love to hear, because I know that he has communicated to them their child parts enough. They've integrated them and held them enough where they actually can recognize whether something's coming and it's kind of more of an adult, what's happening in their adult world that's not triggering their old stuff. So that's when it's like, I'm just coming along for the ride, because they've already now done the work. So I hope that answers your question.
It does.
Hey, Sylvia looked like she had something to say. Yeah.
I'm glad to know. See, you can read my face. Look. So I have a question. So, Dr. Barnes, when it comes to that traumatic event or a traumatic experience, when you are renegotiating safety, and we know that traumatic experiences shifts our lives, right? It shifts us from where we are to somewhere else.
Yes.
When renegotiating the safety, sometimes you want to go back to what's normal or what we deem as normal. But we know that there is another place that we actually have to go to from that traumatic experience. How do you deal with that, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I definitely don't want to leave out the faith piece too, because I think so much of it is, especially if you subscribe to belief, you're so angry that this was not supposed to happen, God. I'm one of yours, So I definitely gonna want to loop back to that. But to answer your question with that is, of course we're gonna want to go back to the familiar, right? The familiar, even if it's toxic, even if it's not safe, it's familiar, Right. So trauma thrusts us out of that to something that's unfamiliar, and I think again, I see everything relational. You guys gonna be like, she's just all about relational. I think the hardest part is educating the people around us that we're different. I think we can somewhat get used to the fact that we're different to ourselves. I mean, we live in our bodies, we're in our heads. We're like, I don't even want to wear these kind of clothes anymore. Remind me. I remember when I had when I lost my son, and I remember the hairstyle I wore. I remember the purse I carried when I was in the hospital, going to the hospital. I remember all of that. And I haven't worn that purse yet. I have not worn that purse yet. It was like, my hair, I totally changed my hair, everything. But that was just a side. But I was okay that I'm different. What was hard was when certain family members, because when we talk about holders, being the holder, that certain family members just expected me to do stuff like I normally did. Like, we were planning things and they're like, oh, well, Teresa's got it. It's like, I don't got it. I mean, I'm never going to be that person again. So I remember I responded in anger first, because I'm like, how dare you not understand me? You can't see how different I am now. That's kind of what was going on psychically. But of course they can't. But I think at the time it was like, how come you don't understand that everything's changed? And then after the anger, I came back and I said, apologize. I meant what I said, but I didn't mean how I said it. Meaning I'm going to still place this boundary that things are different. So it really is, how accommodating is your relational world that is different? Because I'm assuming, and I don't want to assume anything about your life, that some of the pressure to get back to what's normal, and sometimes it's maybe the pressure from your relationships that you need to kind of get, especially if you have children. I mean, you got to get back. You got to get back on it. It's like, well, what if you're forever changed? And it's like, okay, I have to put in my mind that I have to educate. That drains me, because who has the energy after you've been traumatized to then have to educate the people around you about your trauma? I mean, to me, I think that's like a double insult. I just think it's crazy. So then my mindset is like, okay, who is close to what I've been through, or who's been through what I went through? Because I got to get over there. Not so we can trauma bond, because that can happen. You got to be careful. But I just want to be around people who just get it. That I don't have to justify, I don't have to explain it. They could just tell, and I don't know if there are people in your circle or you have to seek that out. I went to a hospital support group because we had a pregnancy law and I was far along in my pregnancy. So that's where it was just like, trauma. But I went to the hospital group. Now, they didn't align with my faith beliefs, unfortunately. That's another conversation. So I didn't feel like there was anyone to hold my crisis of faith, because the churches weren't talking about infertility. They weren't talking about women losing babies, even though the Bible's riddled with women with infertility issues. I just thought that was mystifying to me. I remember after losing my son, I was just like, how is it that I'm going to church every Sunday and there's nothing about that? I was just enraged. And so I would go to the hospital support groups, and I didn't have to explain much to them, but I still kind of left feeling like, well, I still have to reconcile these faith crises. So again, I don't know if I answered your question, but it's this relational world of having to, one, educate the people who've always known you during your pre-big trauma stuff, because we all have had trauma throughout, but the big T, and getting to those spaces where you don't have to explain anything. You almost have to stay in the tension of those, because if you don't have anybody who just gets it, then it just becomes this lonely world, right? You learn to become the world's best actress. That's what you do.
Wow.
You go there and you're like, yeah, okay, I'll bring that dish of potato salad. But it's just
it's unfulfilling.
And they don't know you anymore. I think that's the most painful part about trauma and traumatic loss and mothering, is that when they don't know you anymore. So you got to find those people who can really see you in this.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it all boils down that you have to be honest with yourself about the people around you, because everybody can't take every version of you. Like I know who I could go to and I could be completely vulnerable, but there's some people, they can't take that version of Sylvia. So I have to be, honest with myself to know, like Fancy said, who I could dump off on that could handle it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like
so you don't get traumatized again.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it is. It's just a re-trauma. And I mean, not holding those people. Oh, I used to get so angry when people would say all these stupid things, and I just I didn't think came alongside me the way they needed to. So I'm learning, and I say learning because this has been several years ago, that you got to just love people where they are. They they just don't have it in them. They just
so would you say that goes with like certain agreements, silent agreements that you have with people inside your head, and then you feel like they didn't uphold their end of an agreement that they didn't
even aware of,
and so now you're mad at them for something that they have no idea what's going on?
Yeah, I think that happens a lot. And it was subtle. Like, I'm like, oh, okay, well, we'll be Facebook friends, whatever. And then so whenever the birthday came, instead of putting a happy birthday, I put HBD there. I would have spent more time saying happy birthday if you were there for me. So it would be those little things. And I had to check myself. I'm like, okay, Teresa, I mean, it's been years. I mean, they didn't have it.
I'm still working on that part, Dr. Barnes. They might just get an HBD out of me. I'm with you. But I want to speak to what Ren said here. We have a comment that says, but I also think it's not solely our responsibility to educate others, but everyone should be educated more on how to support others in their trauma. And some of it comes down to just knowing how to display empathy. So I thought that was a good sentiment that she shared.
I think it's amazing. Is she a therapist too? That's amazing.
I don't know who Ren is. I thought that was
people who are not therapists can't come up. It's just the way she said it was. It was like, wow.
I thought that was good too.
I agree. How do we hold? I mean, is it that we're so busy trying because sometimes, again, when I talk about parts work, I mean, our child parts can take over. And they really can. And we don't even see or identify with the adult part too. So learning empathy, I mean, that takes kind of emotional bandwidth. And if you if you're in the trauma brain, you ain't thinking about empathy. You're not thinking about, I need to plan for next month. You're on survival.
Correct.
It's the reptilian brain. It's I'm hungry, I'm horny, I'm mad, I'm scared. It's fight or flight, and when trauma happens, these upper parts of our brain that controls a higher ends of processing, problem solving, rationalizing, it shuts down. it literally shuts down. So all we're functioning, because we're trying to get the heck out. It really is innate primal needs. Unfortunate is when it's chronically happening, we stay in trauma brain. I think culturally as a people, and Tino and I talked about this as well, we stuck in trauma brain. And so, you know, it's very, I think even as being people with melanin, right, we have to be even more intentional about getting to those parts, because some of our parts are ancestral, because the DNA of the slave has been embedded in us. And I love Dr. Joy DeGruy. I'm going to shout her name out because she put out her dissertation in the early 2000s about post-traumatic slave syndrome. I mean, it has affected how we parent, how we do anything, our health, eating, everything. So I love her work because she talks about the trauma of the slave that's embedded in our DNA, and it replicates constantly to this day, but also the power of our resilience, because we were not supposed to survive. Then we weren't supposed to thrive. So here we are surviving and thriving. Oh,
I'm super upset about that.
So we were never supposed to. So when people say, "Oh, this is not the America we know," it's like, this is exactly the America it was, because we weren't supposed to. We were property. They kept our birth records with cattle. Come on, you know.
So
none of this is a surprise.
Additionally, I have a question with that. To get through those things, because being melanated in America, right? We code switch. We do things to go along, to get along, to assimilate, and to not just survive, but now also to thrive. Is the answer to that to just always unapologetically be transparent, to move through that, especially when you're experiencing those things, and then, you know, you attract your vibe, or who's for you will be there for you? Like, just the navigation of it all. What do you suggest in regards to that?
You mean just in the world in general, or among each other as
well, equally, I would say more so in the world. I feel like amongst mine, you know, I can get in where I fit in. We'll find that camaraderie, right?
Yeah.
Base level of it, at least. But my thought process is when you're going through that trauma and it's shattering, so we're not re-injured, right? Because we talk about everything being relational and a disconnect. And so, like Sylvia said, I'm paraphrasing, you can't be real with nobody else till you're real with yourself, right? So if you're constantly, like you said, putting on this, I'm going to bring the potato salad, but you're not being yourself, it's like you're pushing yourself further away from your authentic self. Then the break happens. Then you're not safe in your mind, and you ain't never coming back, right?
That's
so
right.
Is a way to handle that to just always, you know, or find an effective way to just keep it out there, be transparent, or like, hey, this is where I am right now. What do you suggest?
Oh, wow. I love that. Well, this is what I've said in my personal relationships. I said, you know, my 8-year-old child is out now. She's out, and I am going to mother her. I'm going to protect her. It's like with anything that you newly acquired, we're kind of overzealous at first. So I found myself being really hyper vigilant about protecting her when I first started feeling, kind of making meaning of her presence. Now I'm tempering it a little bit. I'm like, okay, I'm kind of getting used. But when you try something new at first, it's going to be like, oh, more or less. So I've been very open about that with people in my personal life. Now, you know, people that I hear go, I'm not going to say, oh, my childhood self wants to hear you say this, you know. But thankfully, and I even think about my own family, the bigger family, not just like my immediate, there always are at least one or two people that can hold it. I'm so grateful to them. You know, so I've kept my numbers small in terms of there are at least one or two people in my circle. I mean, I have found clients who say, well, there's no one. Well, that's why the therapeutic relationship is here, right? Because I have to hold it with them. But for most of us, there's usually one or two. And I think connecting with those, because again, you can educate people all day long and they can still look at you and be like, well, I know your uncle who's been through much worse, and he's still, you know, and it's like, okay, you know, so there's some people who will never really just receive it. And I don't know if I'm answering your question.
You are.
But I think I made my model. A lot of people came out of COVID with a model, like, this is what I'm going to do now differently. This is how I'm going to work differently. This is how my relationship differently. This is what I came out of. Safety. I will not spend my time with people who are not safe. I
Hmm.
can't do it. I
So-
cannot do it. I would not spend my time. Well, and I mean, that's fluid, right? Because if people who are not safe are people you're living with, you're not going to say, well, I'm leaving, because I don't want people then saying, well, Dr. Barnes said we should get divorced because
Right.
you're not safe. I mean, there's many layers, obviously. If it's your spouse that's not safe, or whatever, there's many layers to that. Because then I would recommend, maybe getting a pastor or a couples counselor or whatever for that. But I mean, just people, normal people you just kind of push through. You'd be like, oh man, I don't want to be bothered, but I'm just going to get this over with.
So, Dr. Barnes, we have another question. It says, do you think we can carry so much trauma because we have, in a way, been accustomed to it because of our resilience in so much as a whole and individually?
Do we have the capacity to carry more, did she say?
Yeah, it's like, do you think we carry so much trauma because we have been accustomed to it?
Yes. And who's co-signing that? Our bodies. They always say, well, when America gets the cold, Black America gets the flu. And I used to think, yeah, it's because of geographical racism and food deserts. And I think all of that's true. Very true. But I think the body holds what the mind can't communicate. And so much with trauma, it's William Faulkner had said this. I mean, he was a racist, but I do appreciate his literary input. Was trauma is the assault on an unprepared psyche, which means that we haven't even developed the words for sometimes how we're feeling. And when you don't have words to stuff, that's where the trauma is, because then it's just feelings and it's just this overwhelm. But when we can apply words, then we can apply meaning. So I do think that our bodies generationally have held these traumas that had no voice. There was no platform to say, this is horrible that this happened to you as a people. We need to restitute this. No, we just have to keep going and moving and surviving and still being under threat, right? Because that hasn't went away. So I think that our bodies have held it. Do I think it's directly related to heart disease, diabetes? Because of course there's food habits and all that other stuff and everything else I just mentioned. But I think it makes our immunity different because trauma changes how the cells mutate. Trauma changes how cells repair. I think epigenetics is the study of epigenetics talking about that. It changes your brain wiring. Everything is changed in terms of when you think that. It's like, well, of course, if my immunity has been affected, then when this virus comes, my body's going to respond differently. That's why we need people of color or people who are culturally competent in healthcare, mental health care, because I tell them, I say, if we're going to get in therapy, we're not going to go to any Joe Schmo. We're going to go to someone who specializes in trauma, because with us, it's going to be trauma work. That's what I say.
Dr. Barnes, you talked about relationship, and one of the values that I hold is that everything is connected mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, right? So if we don't let it out verbally, the body is going to communicate it to you, right? We see the caregivers that we're speaking to, the largest carrier of fibroid tumors, right? And so when we dig on an esoteric level or spiritual level, we recognize that's a blow to the feminine ego. That's something that occurred, a trauma, right? But we got to keep being strong. We got to take care of this side, and then go to work, right? Absolutely. And so you're holding it in your body, and it's going to come out one way or another, right? So with that relationship, right, what you spoke about initially, everything is connected. And so I'm so thankful to be at a time where we can have open concourses about things like this, find safe spaces, be aware, and educate this side, and our clients about it, so we can change the trajectory and heal ourselves.
It is really about that. That's why the nutrition piece is a nice little segue into that, because I do think there's a way, at least to restore the brain function. Because I always tell people, hey, you know what? The brain has to be fed to do the emotional work.
I like Dr. Daniel Ammon. He said everything you eat affects your brain, right?
It does.
Even things we put on our skin, it's our largest organ. Yeah. It goes right through. We know that because at least 3 out of 4 people on this panel has probably had a perm in their head, right?
Yes.
Another thing that was, you know what I mean?
4?
So
Out of 4.
Oh, 4 out of 4? Well, there you have it.
Yes. Absolutely. And I have had a long history of fibroids. So when all that started coming up, and that led to some of the infertility issues I had, I was like, wait a minute, so it definitely, and I kind of wanted to kind of make sure I don't forget. I know we're coming to the close, but that the faith beliefs, like when our faith beliefs have been traumatized, when we no longer feel safe with our faith beliefs, we don't feel held by them, and what that may mean, because I think that runs the spectrum. I think there's some people who are like, well, the Bible says that this is what things happen. They can kind of go, and then sometimes we feel convicted or we feel judged because people say, well, you just need to go pray and you just not have enough faith. And it's like, well, no, I think it's bringing back the humanity that I spoke about at the beginning. We need to bring our humanity back to our spirituality too. I said, Jesus cried. And when I think about this as aloneness, I said, well, Jesus had disciples. I mean, so I shouldn't be happy with being isolated and alone. Correct. I had a client who said that, she wasn't allowed to cry in her family, but her parents were very religious. I'm thinking, well, didn't Jesus cry? And didn't it say in the Bible that God collects our tears? We don't collect things that are not valuable.
It also says when others cry, cry. When they rejoice, rejoice.
Yeah.
That Ren was talking about.
Bringing the humanity. And if we have a relationship with God, why can't we be mad at him? I was taught that growing up, those kind of legalistic, well, you shouldn't be mad at God. You don't question God. It's like, well, I have a relationship with my husband. I question him. And God wants us not to put God in the level of my husband, but conceptually, when you're having an intimate relationship, it's okay. He knows it anyway. I can't tell you how many times I've thrown Bibles across the room because I was just so angry. But I stay. I stay in my anger. I'm like, I'm going to be angry at you every day, but I'm going to tell you about it in prayer. Angry, and then slowly, because I know that he's still there regardless. And that's what the participants learned from my study. They were like, but he's still here. He's still here, and I can be safe that he's still here, even if he doesn't decide. And we've seen that in the Bible, even if he does not decide to deliver us, we still believe. And that kind of faith in the unseen, hope in the unseen. And you mentioned that, Fancy. I don't know why, but that's what's filling the room for me today is the unseen. And there was a period of time where I felt unseen as Black women. And I believe, I don't want to leave you out, but it seems like there's been this attack on Black women lately, professionally. Is feeling unseen in what we do. I mean, that's why I left the toxic job recently, is I felt so unseen. And I was beating myself up about that. I'm like, why do I feel unseen? And I just really felt in my devotional time that God was saying to me in prayer, he said, but I'm in the unseen. I'm in the unseen. Everything I do is unseen. And then it just changed my whole perspective on being unseen. I'm like, oh, okay, I can do this. If you're in the unseen and what you do is unseen, then maybe it's okay.
Hey, Sylvia, what you got? You look like you got something again.
I don't have anything. I'm just taking in what she's saying because it's so true. Like, we still operate unseen, and that's a lot to carry.
Yeah, it is. It is a lot to be unseen. But they see us in other ways, which still makes us feel unseen. The stereotypical, way, you're used as a function, which that has obviously racialized connotation. You're a function. So bringing back our humanity is more than a notion. I think by asking to be cared for, to be held, we bring back our humanity too.
So one of the things I'm going to say is truly everything is connected, because I know with Sylvia and Fancy, one of the things that we were talking about just a few days ago was how am I seen and unseen at the same time? How am I acknowledged and ignored at the same time? That's a weird thing. So you bring that up just now. I'm like, oh, for sure, everything is connected. Like,
it is
unseen.
What a time to be alive.
Someone asked me
and talk to.
Someone asked me recently, they're like, well, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with feeling unseen in your professional world? I said, I started my business.
That's it. I opt out. I believe in get to where they love you. Find your vibe, find your tribe. It's a
Yep.
whole world out here, right?
Yep.
Relationships are important. We were talking about the Bible, and I remember being judgmental to people because I just felt like you just have to have somebody. You just have to be in a relationship.
Yeah.
In my senior sensitivity, I recognized in the beginning, after Adam was done naming all the animals, he looked and said, well, they got somebody. They got somebody. Well, I don't have nobody, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
need that communal thing. We need that counterpart, right?
We do.
And I also like what you talked about in being transparent in your relationship with your maker. It sounded like therapy, right?
Mhm.
Every ship, relationship, platonic, no matter what it is, peaks and valleys, ups and downs. But we choose to stay with the important ones, right? So you work
Yes.
that. I'm upset. I'm hurt. I don't understand why you did that, right? You're my father. You're my maker. What did I do to deserve that, right?
Absolutely.
But you still have that relationship and you walk through it, right? And effectively communicate it to dispel that and now get back to the peaks. So I love that you said that.
Thank you. And I think a lot of it, what we could do for each other, those of us in Christian circles, is to allow ourselves to do that as well. Like when you said in the relational piece, do you have the capacity, being able to tell people, hey, don't tell me to just say more prayers and scriptures. I mean, you get to that, but being able to be okay that we're not all okay. I don't know why we stigmatize that because you have your people of faith, you shouldn't have to struggle like this. If you struggle, that means you must have did something or whatever.
It's okay not to be okay. And it's okay to say I'm not okay, right?
Absolutely. And be
and
held in that.
Yeah, we've been taught to be strong and muster on and keep going. I had an experience where my father, I was like, oh, and I almost had an anxiety attack. And he was like, no, you didn't. You fancy daily. And hey, this has been going on before. And you know, and I appreciate that because it gave me, it's got its place. But at this time, I was like, time out, daddy. Like, let me just feel my feelings. I'll be back, but let me just feel this because I'm so used to suppressing and bypassing, right? But it's going to manifest somewhere. So I'm like, let me deal with it in the here and now, right? Then we can put that away. Now I can move on effectively. So just recognizing that is so imperative for us in the skin that we're in to recognize, realize, and accept that, the things of old, right? We don't have to steadfast to that, right? There's an awakening. We can realize and we can do things differently for the greater good of ourselves.
I love it.
One question that I have is how do we become aware of these things, even if it's just like a small nugget, like even if it's just like, hey, in the moment, stop, look, listen, so that it doesn't then go and affect our bodies?
Probably practice. As with anything else, right? Do we have to build that muscle to say stop, right? Whatever we've been doing, just do it differently.
And I lean towards trauma. I know there's other ills, but I just think that's just such an undercurrent. I think our body is what leads us. Because for instance, when I'm with clients, we're talking about something triggering and then I'll pause, come very real time. And I said, what's your body doing? Because remember, our body will co-sign. It holds what the body can't speak and the behavior communicates. So what we get caught up in is the behavior. We'll be like, oh, but it's like, okay, what is the body holding that the mind can't speak out that we see in behavior? And so often clients will talk about their gut. Like they'd be like, oh, something in my stomach or feel heavy. With me, when I started to identify my child part, it was a little bit of the body. I started to feel kind of really hollow in my gut. And I feel like I wanted to disappear in the floor. When I feel like I want to hunker down and just disappear, that's when I know she's come up because there's shame wrapped up in that age. And so I just feel like I just want to disappear. And that's where before I used to try to press it down because I didn't know what it was. Now I'm like, okay, wait, you're here. What's happening? Psychically, there's something going on that she's like, I remember this. And it's always relational. It's like, oh, I remember being here. And so I try to be more internal. To answer your question, Tino, is like, what is the body doing? Because our bodies, if we learn to listen, they will tell us. I'll hear clients say, well, really the heaviness in my chest or my jaws tightening. And so we'll stop right there and we'll do some body work right there. Because what we want to do is personify it. If that feeling in my jaw had a voice, what would it be saying? Right?
Wow.
Not what I'm saying, because that's kind of threatening, right? So is what what would this say? And often they'll say, well, I feel this is tightening their throat, like I can't speak, I can't say. How do we give that part of you the voice again, right? And we start doing therapeutic work around that. So I think listening, our bodies will lead us. That's why I really do the integrated. I'm holistic. I'm like, our bodies are going to tell us, because one, our bodies are smarter than us. For one thing, we know that because when we eat the wrong thing, our body's like, oh wait, no,
Right away.
not happening.
Yep.
Not happening today. And then we go through years of saying shut up, and then we get all these autoimmune disorders where the body just says, screw you, I've been doing this for years, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
So I do think the whole mind and body piece, the body will tell us that, oh wait, something doesn't feel good. I hope that makes sense, Tino.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Listen to your body.
Yeah.
I love it. Like they're like, oh, you're lactose intolerant. No, you have an allergy. Anytime you put a chemical in your body and it has an adverse effect and it reacts that way, right? Any other time we recognize it as an allergy, but because we want to, go along or whatever the Food and Drug Administration is saying, we're going to label it something else. So just really get into the root of things, whether it's what we're putting in our body, what our bodies are communicating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just getting back to that, because like you were talking about, in other maybe third world countries, right, they're able to do things differently because it's communal, right?
Yes.
It's looked at as a collective, as a whole. And here we try to compartmentalize things when our body, it's the reason that your left knee is hurting, right? On an esoteric or spiritual level. It's a reason why, that tension is there in your jaws or in your shoulders. And you know what I mean? So just getting to that. So I like a DO at all costs.
Oh man, Fancy. That's amazing. Because one of the things that you always say is you can tell the truth by the way it feels.
By the way it feels.
Oh, that's powerful. That's a very powerful point, because I also teach my clients, what does it feel like to feel good in your mind, your body? Because you can go to that place as a resource when you're triggered. It's like, how do I get back to that feeling of safety in my body?
Dr. Barnes, you said our bodies are smarter than us, right?
Yeah,
so I might think I'm very logical. I might think, I'm whatever the case may be. But when you just sit, right? Because we're quick in this world to, take a Band-Aid or take something to cover it, or, once again, suppress it instead of acknowledging and treating it, right? Absolutely. And so I love that you said that our bodies are smarter than we are. Yes. So I always say they know. You know the truth by the way it feels. So when I say that means I'm done talking. So even with
wonderful.
We the truth, you feel us, and that's how you know the truth by the way it feels. So
I like that. I'm gonna borrow that. That was awesome.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Hey, I know Fancy got a ton of them, but I know we're coming up on the hour. So really, going back to what you said, Dr. Barnes, about finding those people who are in a safe space, finding those people who are safe, and then people who can guide you out. How do our viewers, how are they able to connect with you, to follow you? Like, can you share like where you're at, your social media, how they can reach out to you, website, whatever?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I am at www.restorativeplace.com, not PLLC, but Restorative Place. The PLLC pops up because my digital marketing team is in the process of trying to integrate. So when people say that, that's not it, but it's just www.restorativeplace.com. I'm on Facebook. I have a business page. I'm on Instagram under Restorative Place. LinkedIn, but you get my website. I think I have all those other links on there as well. So yes, it's been a pleasure just sitting with you guys, and the great meeting of minds, right?
Absolutely. Can't thank you enough.
I'm glad I got to just be a witness and learn. Just sit back and take it all in.
It's greater later. We having you back, Dr. Barnes. I don't know when. I don't know why.
I would love it. This is perfect. This is May. Mental Health Awareness Month. So
okay.
Anything you want to, just like a quick thing that you want to say about Mental Health Awareness Month?
Yeah, I think so much of it is, let's be aware of the general population that needs help, and they very much they do. But the holder, those who do this work. When I think about mental health awareness, it's like I think about my own, like how am I getting fed? How am I being cared for? So I do think a lot of it is mothering your own mind, or in your case, fathering your own mind, is my whole goal is how do I teach others, and how do I continue to inform myself on how to mother my own mind? So I challenge it, like what you would say to your child.
Yes.
Say this to the parts of you that don't feel safe and that feel unheld. And that God can hold us even when we feel unheld by him. He can hold us in our disbelief, and I think that's the thing. Is there were a long time where I'm like, I'm just in this kind of disbelief a little bit here, God. I'm gonna do this, but and I think he's okay with that because he made me. So it's like, you knew I was gonna be feeling this way. So yeah, let's mother our own minds. That's how I would leave it.
Okay. Yeah, what I will say is, like, definitely, because we talked about a lot of emotional trauma, I would definitely advise everybody who's watching this to reach out to Dr. Barnes for that. But if you got financial trauma, the rest of us three here on the screen, we got you. Hey, we've been through some things on the financial side too. So this is a powerful team. Everybody that you see on the screen, we can help you get through different types of trauma. Fancy Sylvia, anything y'all want to say to close us out?
The truth by the way it feels. I'll keep going, so I have to keep it short and sweet. I'm very thankful for you and your space, Dr. Barnes, because of course, in the skin that we're in and in the arena that we're in, there can be a major disconnect. So when people can reach out to somebody like you who's experienced it on one level, but has a professional outlook on another, a spiritual, right? A personal, just the collective, right?
Yes.
It's a great place to be able to connect with somebody like yourself because of the different approaches that you can see and identify. And I'm excited for us as a community to be okay with saying we're not okay, with being vulnerable, right? With seeking out help, with the stigma being taken away from. We look at every other kind of help. We go to a doctor for everything else, whether it's our teeth, our eyes, our internal, right? But we're going to neglect our brain. So I'm excited for us to take away the stigma and association with having someone to talk to. Another thing, I love that you said we need to mother our own mind. For me, that may look like mothering my mind, because I think what happens in our core years, whatever we're taught, whatever we're told, this kind of becomes our conscience, right? So now that we're older, right, and we have a different aptitude, we can mother ourselves. We don't have to listen to those things once it could be something as simple as eat all your food. I don't need to eat all my food. I've had enough, right? This is leading to something else. So now you parent yourself to say, I've had enough, right? I'm going to set this to the side. If I want more, I can come back for more. Or I can open 2 boxes of cereal and not get in trouble. Whatever it needs to be. Whatever it needs to be. But definitely mother your own mind. Lean upon your own, well, not your own discernment, but especially with that spiritual relationship, right? Listening to your body. Our bodies are smarter than us. I love that. Love it. So I can't thank you enough, right? I definitely look forward to, even if it is next May, every mental health awareness month or whatever the case may be, for you to join us.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I just want to say thank you, because you touched on so many different things, but it's okay to unlearn things that we've learned, like Fancy said. And I think that will help us to heal and become a better version of ourselves, because a lot of things that we learned wasn't the right thing. So I just want to say thank you for everything that you conveyed today. It was great.
Oh, you're welcome. This is a pleasure.
Man, there's really nothing to say after that. I hope all of our viewers learned something. Just take it, pass it along to somebody who may need to just enjoy it, even whether it's for entertainment or whether if it's something to truly help them. We just want to help everybody that we come across, put everybody in a better place. And with that being said, bye. I hope
reach out to Dr. Barnes, you guys.
Bye. Guys, have a good week.
Likewise. Thank you.
Bye-bye.